It was supposed to be just another light-hearted appearance. Hollywood legend Denzel Washington, center stage on a late-night talk show, charming the crowd with his signature wit and presence. The audience was all smiles. The host cracked jokes. Clips from Denzel's latest film played on the screen. Everything felt familiar, routine. But what happened next would send shockwaves across the world. Midway through the show, the host leaned forward with a sly grin. "We've got a surprise for you, Denzel," he said. The screen behind them flickered to life, revealing the flag of a nation many in the audience barely recognized, Burkina Faso. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then came a voice. Calm. Measured. Deeply respectful. "Good evening, Mr. Washington. This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso." Denzel froze. You could hear the tension shift in the room. For the first time in the show's history, not a single laugh, not a whisper. Just one man holding his breath, caught between past and present. What followed wasn't just a tribute. It was a soul-shaking revelation that would leave the Oscar winner in tears and the global audience in awe. A barefoot boy from West Africa, once inspired by a movie, had grown into a president. And now, he was reaching across oceans to thank the man who unknowingly gave him the courage to stand. But this was only the beginning. What unfolded in the next 7 days would become one of the most emotional, unforgettable stories ever captured on camera. A story of gratitude, of leadership, of a mother who changed the world without ever leaving her village. And at the heart of it all, a man who thought he was just making movies, until he realized he had helped shape a nation's future. Stay with us, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. It began with laughter. The audience roared as Denzel recounted a funny moment from his latest role. The host, grinning, played along. It was classic late-night charm, the perfect balance of humor, nostalgia, and star power. But behind Denzel's smile, there was something distant in his eyes. As if part of him wasn't really in that studio. Then the host interrupted the flow. "Denzel, we have a little something special lined up for you tonight." Denzel raised an eyebrow, curious. "Oh yeah?" The studio lights dimmed. The screen behind them lit up. A red, green, and gold flag waved gently in the digital wind. The words Burkina Faso appeared. A confused hush fell over the room. Then a voice filled the air, deep, sincere, and gently accented. "Good evening, Mr. Washington. This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso." Time stopped. Denzel blinked. The audience held its breath. The host looked completely blindsided. "Mr. Washington," the president continued, "you do not know me. But when I was 14, I watched you in glory. You played a soldier who would not kneel. A man who cried but never broke. That image, it stayed with me." Denzel's expression changed. The charm dropped. His eyes widened, lips parted, as if struggling to process what he was hearing. "That night," Traoré said, his voice steady, "I told my mother, one day, I will fight for justice too. Like him." There was silence in the studio. Not even a cough. No one dared move. "I lead my country today not because I am fearless," Traoré said, "but because I saw what courage looked like in you." Denzel's hands slowly moved to cover his mouth. His shoulders began to tremble. The camera zoomed in, eyes glistening, lips quivering. "You helped shape a man who refused to kneel to injustice," the president concluded. A tear rolled down Denzel's cheek. "Thank you, my brother," he whispered. The audience gasped softly. But what Traoré said next turned a powerful moment into something legendary. "Mr. Washington, I would like to invite you to Burkina Faso. We want to honor you. And we wish to name a leadership school after you so that our children may learn what strength, dignity, and vision look like." Denzel looked stunned. He shook his head, humbled. I don't deserve that." Traoré smiled on the screen. "That is exactly why you do." The screen faded to black. The call ended. And Denzel, Oscar winner, icon, legend, buried his face in his hands and cried. What started as a talk show surprise had become something deeper, something spiritual. A spark had been lit. And within 24 hours, Denzel Washington would be on a plane to West Africa. Denzel didn't sleep the night after the broadcast. The president's words echoed in his mind, looping endlessly. His eyes were still red when the cameras stopped rolling, and even the crew stayed unusually quiet. By morning, social media had exploded. Denzel and Traoré was trending in over 20 countries. Clips of the emotional exchange went viral. But while the world reacted, Denzel packed his bag. Not for a premiere or an awards ceremony. This trip was different. He took only the essentials, a small backpack, his passport, and a folded letter he found tucked in an old book. A note his mother once wrote him. "Your strength is in your quiet acts of love." He booked the first available flight. No entourage. No studio reps, no spotlight. Just one man flying across the ocean with a heart full of questions. When he landed in Ouagadougou, there were no red carpets. No paparazzi. Just heat rising from the tarmac and a quiet black SUV waiting by the runway. A single man stood beside it, dressed simply in a crisp white shirt and sandals. It was him. President Ibrahim Traoré. Their eyes met. No words. No press cameras. Just two men, one who had unknowingly inspired a revolution, the other who had carried that spark into power. They embraced. "I'm honored you came," Traoré said softly. "I didn't come as a star," Denzel replied. "I came as a brother." As the SUV rolled through the dusty roads of Ouagadougou, they passed street markets, motorbikes, and children running barefoot beside the vehicle, waving with wide smiles. No one knew who was inside. They drove for nearly an hour until they reached a modest home, sun-worn clay walls, a tin roof, and bougainvillea growing wild by the door. "This was my home," Traoré said, his voice lower now, almost reverent. "Where it all began." He led Denzel inside. No guards. No aides. Just silence and the scent of shea butter and old wood. Family photos hung crooked on the walls. On a shelf, an old VHS copy of Glory. Then, Traoré handed him a wrinkled black and white photo. In it, a young boy clung to the hand of an older woman. "She raised me," he said. "My grandmother. Maman Hawa." Denzel studied the image. Her smile. Her eyes. The strength in the way she stood. "She's still alive?" he asked. Traoré nodded. 85. Still works cleaning classrooms in a rural school. She never asked for anything. Denzel looked up, a lump rising in his throat. "She said God gave me legs. I'll use them till he takes them." They got back in the SUV and drove toward the woman who unknowingly raised not only a president but a movement. The road narrowed as they drove farther from the city. Paved streets gave way to dusty paths lined with mango trees and modest homes. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, mingling with the soft rustle of dry leaves in the breeze. Then, just beyond a bend, the school appeared. It was humble, weathered stone walls, cracked chalkboards, and hand-painted signs. But it pulsed with life. Barefoot children ran across the yard, drawing in the dirt with sticks, their laughter unbothered by the world outside. And then she appeared. Bent slightly at the waist, broom in hand, her pace slow but steady. Her dress was faded, her headwrap frayed, but her posture held dignity. Her presence commanded quiet respect. Traoré stepped out first. He walked toward her, voice caught in his throat. She looked up and froze. "Ibrahim?" she whispered. The president rushed forward, falling into her arms like a boy again. "Maman Hawa." They wept in silence, their embrace the kind only a lifetime can build. The children paused, unsure whether to run or watch. Denzel stepped forward slowly, unsure if his presence was welcome in this sacred moment. She turned, eyes widening, and gasped. You're him," she said, reaching out, fingers trembling as they touched his face. Denzel, overwhelmed, knelt before her. She touched his cheek gently, smiling through tears. I watched you when my grandson watched you. You gave him something we could not name then. But I see it now." They sat together under the shade of a baobab tree in the courtyard. Traoré at her side. Denzel opposite her. Her hands were rough, her skin like parchment, but her voice held warmth that wrapped around them like a blanket. She told stories. Of young Ibrahim, how he once gave her his only piece of mango during a drought. How he'd cry quietly when the nights were too cold. How he once wrote a letter and tucked it under her pillow. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded, yellowed paper. "I kept it," she said. Denzel leaned in. In shaky handwriting the note read, "One day I will be a leader. And I will find you, Mama. I promise." Traoré covered his mouth, remembering the moment instantly. "It was her birthday," he said. "She gave me her last piece of bread that day." Denzel wiped a tear. She held on to hope. That's the kind of faith that changes the world. Suddenly, a young student ran across the courtyard, laughing, holding a cracked plastic ball. "Mama, will you play?" Without hesitation, she stood up, still barefoot, still strong, and chased after him, laughing all the way. Denzel watched her, something deep inside him shifting. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He had found something sacred. News of Denzel's visit to Burkina Faso spread like wildfire. Photos leaked online, grainy, unfiltered shots of him walking barefoot beside Maman Hawa, laughing with schoolchildren, and sitting under the baobab tree. But it wasn't the usual celebrity buzz. This was different. People didn't just see a star. They saw a man transformed. Within hours, hashtags began trending, hashtag Denzel in Africa, hashtag Mama Hawa, and hashtag Hope Across Oceans. Social media lit up with reactions not just from fans but from world leaders, educators, and parents. The most powerful TV moment of the decade. One headline read. Another simply said, "He didn't go for a photo op. He went for the soul." Meanwhile, Denzel and Traoré stayed quiet. No press conferences. No interviews. Just quiet visits to local communities. A hospital. A food center. A rural library where Denzel sat on the ground reading aloud to children. Then came the moment no one expected. At a small ceremony held in the village schoolyard, President Traoré stood before Maman Hawa, holding a velvet box. Denzel beside him, hands clasped. "Maman," the president said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "for your lifetime of service to this country, not as a politician, but as a mother, a teacher, and a guardian of hope, I present to you the highest civilian honor in Burkina Faso." He opened the box to reveal a golden medallion, engraved with her name and the national seal. The children clapped. Teachers wept. Then Denzel stepped forward. "I spoke to my producer this morning," he said, his voice cracking. "We're going to tell your story, Mama. The world will see it. And every cent from the film will go toward building schools in your name." Maman Hawa dropped to her knees, sobbing. She had spent her life giving. Now the world was giving back. But what neither of them knew then, what none of them could possibly have expected, was that the greatest moment was still to come. And it would shake the world to its core. The following morning, Maman Hawa was quieter than usual. She moved slower, her eyes a bit dimmer, though her smile never left. She had hugged countless children, spoken to visiting dignitaries, and smiled through cameras she never asked for. But her strength, like the sun at dusk, was gently fading. That afternoon, she called for just two people, Ibrahim and Denzel. They entered her small clay home, simple and cool. The walls were lined with hand-woven baskets, and in the corner, an old radio softly played traditional Burkinabe music. She sat on her mat, legs folded neatly beneath her. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for theirs. "I'm old," she said quietly. "I won't see the next planting season." Denzel shook his head. Traoré swallowed hard. "I don't say this with fear," she added. "I say it with peace. Because I've seen the harvest." She turned to Traoré. "You made me proud, my son. You stood tall. But now I ask for something greater." She looked at Denzel, then back at both of them. No child in Burkina Faso should go to school hungry. Promise me that. Tears welled in both men's eyes. They nodded. No speeches. Just truth. Then she reached under her mat and pulled out something carefully wrapped in cloth, a faded, hand-stitched scarf. It was the one young Ibrahim had tied around her arm as a pretend medal when he played president as a boy. She placed it in Traoré's hands. My first medal, she said, smiling faintly. And my last gift. She turned to Denzel one final time. You tell stories that make people feel, she whispered. Tell this one. Not for me. For them. Denzel couldn't speak. He simply nodded, holding her hand to his forehead. Moments later, Maman Hawa leaned back gently against the wall. The light in her eyes dimmed like a flame turning to ember. She closed her eyes. And with a soft breath, she was gone. Outside, the village seemed to know. The woman stopped mid-sentence. Children looked up from their games. Even the birds quieted. President Traoré stood up slowly, holding the scarf. Denzel knelt beside the mat, head bowed, shoulders trembling. She gave me everything when I had nothing, the president said. Now I must give everything back. He turned to Denzel, holding up the scarf like a sacred banner. We will build something in her name. A school. A garden. A future. Denzel looked up, tears in his eyes. Yes. Yes, we will. I'll help. The sun outside was beginning to set, casting a golden hue across the clay walls. Maman Hawa had returned to the earth. But her spirit, her strength, her love, her fire, was just beginning to rise. By nightfall, word had spread. In the quiet glow of lanterns, villagers gathered in the square, some holding candles, others with nothing but tearful eyes and open hearts. Maman Hawa's passing wasn't just a local sorrow, it was a national silence. And by morning, it would be a global moment. President Traoré declared a national day of mourning. Flags flew at half-staff. Radio stations played traditional songs of farewell. Even international outlets paused their usual reports to broadcast the news. But there was no parade. No military fanfare. Just a wooden casket in the center of her village, surrounded by flowers picked from nearby gardens. Traoré walked behind it, dressed simply, the hand-stitched scarf draped over his shoulder like a royal sash. Denzel followed closely, his face bare, his eyes swollen from tears. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. As the casket was lowered into the earth, elders sang songs of remembrance. Children, many of them barefoot and wide-eyed, placed small stones at the grave. One boy, no older than 7, walked up quietly and placed a hand-drawn letter atop the casket. It read, "Thank you for raising our president." A single bird landed on the wooden frame and did not move. Denzel stepped forward, hands trembling, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old necklace, his father's. "She reminds me of him," he said quietly. "Strong, quiet, and never asked for anything." He placed it gently on the grave. Then he whispered, "Goodbye, Mama." The cameras that had come quietly lowered. Some things, it seemed, were too sacred to film. That night, under the open sky, Denzel and President Traoré sat on a straw mat by the fire. They didn't eat. They didn't plan. They just listened, to the wind, the crackle of firewood, and the echo of a voice they'd never forget. Then, slowly, Traoré spoke. "Denzel, this week, I remembered who I am." Denzel nodded, eyes never leaving the flames. "Me too." In that silence, a pact was born. Not signed in ink, but sealed in grief, gratitude, and purpose. The next day, the world would see the first announcement, the Mama Hawa Foundation, a joint initiative to provide food, education, and emotional healing to rural children across Burkina Faso and beyond. Denzel pledged his full salary from his next film to the cause. But it wasn't the money that moved people. It was the heart behind it. A few days later, a short video appeared on Denzel's official page. No production. No background music. Just him, standing beneath the baobab tree. He looked into the camera and said, "If one woman in a small village can raise a future president and change the heart of a Hollywood actor, then what are we waiting for?" The video reached 100 million views in 24 hours. And the world held its breath to see what would come next. 3 days after Maman Hawa was laid to rest, Denzel quietly returned to the United States. No press conferences. No red carpet. Just a quiet arrival at LAX, his face aged by grief, his heart changed by purpose. But the world wasn't ready to let the story fade. His scheduled live interview, promoted for weeks in advance, couldn't be cancelled. The network insisted. Denzel reluctantly agreed on one condition: no script, no pre-written questions. Just honesty. The stage was bright. The audience is buzzing. Everyone expected him to talk about his new film. Instead, when the host asked, "What's one moment that changed your soul?" Denzel reached into his jacket and pulled out the scarf. He held it gently, like it was alive. "This," he said, "this was tied around a woman's arm when a boy played pretend president in a village most people have never heard of. That boy grew up to be a leader. That woman raised him. And this week, she raised me too." The studio fell silent. "And what did President Traoré say to you, exactly?" the host asked, visibly moved. Denzel picked up his phone, opened a voice recording, and let the world hear. "Thank you for honoring a woman the world forgot but who made a man the world remembers." The silence broke as Denzel's voice cracked. He clutched the scarf to his chest, tears slipping down his face. Social media erupted. Newsrooms froze. Families paused their dinners. In that moment, Denzel wasn't a celebrity. He was a vessel for something deeper: memory, justice, and reverence. The clip became the most shared video of the year. People across the globe responded not just with tears, but with action. A humble GoFundMe started by a schoolteacher in Burkina Faso aimed to raise $10,000 for classroom supplies. It hit $1 million in just 2 hours. From Tokyo to Toronto and Johannesburg to Sao Paulo, people donated, posted, prayed, and reflected. Parents called their mothers. Teachers shared stories of their students. Teenagers wrote letters to their grandmothers. In the midst of it all, something remarkable happened. Children in villages across Burkina Faso began writing letters, not to Santa, not to celebrities, but to President Traoré. One letter read, "If I study hard like you did, will I make my mother proud too?" Another simply said, "Thank you for not forgetting her." The Mama Hawa Foundation began receiving support from NGOs, philanthropists, and everyday citizens. Not because it was trending, but because it felt like a mirror. A mirror showing us who we are and who we could be. And through it all, Denzel remained quiet. Until one morning, he posted a photo to Instagram, a single baobab tree standing alone in a golden field. The caption read, "She watered roots that now hold up nations." No hashtags. No promotion. Just truth. And in that truth, a movement was growing. Exactly 1 week after the surprise call that changed everything, a quiet ceremony was held in the capital city of Ouagadougou. There was no fanfare. No national anthem. Just a slow hush as villagers, government officials, children, and foreign guests gathered in the heart of the city's central garden. In the center of it all stood a cloth-covered figure, waiting to be unveiled. President Traoré stepped forward, joined by Denzel Washington. Neither man spoke at first. They simply held candles, one red, one gold, and stood side by side beneath the setting sun. Then, together, they pulled back the cloth. The statue beneath was not grandiose. It didn't show battle or triumph. Instead, it depicted a woman, barefoot, slightly bent, her head held high. In one hand she held a child's hand. In the other, a broom. And around her arm was a carved replica of the scarf. A bronze plaque read, "To Maman Hawa, the mother of all leaders." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Children wept openly. Elders dropped to their knees. Foreign diplomats wiped their eyes. Traoré took a breath. This is not a monument to power. It is a tribute to love. Denzel stepped forward, his voice quiet but clear. She reminded us that greatness isn't about what the world gives you. He said, "It's about what you give the world, when no one's watching." He paused, then added, "She raised a president. She healed a stranger. And now, she inspires a generation." Then came the final surprise. Denzel unfolded a small document and handed it to Traoré. "Today, I'm proud to announce the Hawa Fund," he said, "a scholarship created in partnership with the Burkina Faso government. It's dedicated to girls from rural Africa who dream of leading, just like President Traoré once did." Cheers erupted from the crowd. But more than that, there was a collective sigh, as if the world had exhaled a breath it didn't know it had been holding. Later that night, under the stars, Denzel and Traoré stood once more before the statue. No cameras. No crowd. Just silence. "She never asked for anything," Traoré said. "And gave everything," Denzel replied. The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves. Some said they felt her there. A presence in the breeze. A warmth in the stillness. A whisper carried on the wind. "Take care of each other." Days passed, and yet the story did not fade. It grew. In homes across continents, families watched the statue unveiling replayed on television. In schools, teachers read aloud Maman Hawa's story during morning assemblies. Artists painted murals, musicians composed songs, and children, inspired by a woman they never met, began to believe that love could change the world. And then, Denzel returned to television. One final time. This time, it wasn't for promotion. It wasn't to talk about a movie, or a foundation, or even himself. It was to issue a challenge. Sitting alone in a quiet studio, no host, no laughter, no cuts, he looked into the camera and said, "Dear viewers, if this story moved you, if it made you cry, made you think, reminded you of your mother, your grandmother, your teacher, or your roots, then I ask you to do just one thing." He paused. "Say thank you. Not just in words, but in action. Tell someone who shaped you that you remember them. And if they're no longer here, then build something that would make them proud." He held up the scarf one last time. This belonged to a woman who never saw the inside of a palace but raised a man who now leads one. This belonged to someone the world would have ignored, if not for a moment of truth. And I believe there are millions more like her, waiting to be seen. His voice lowered. "I've played kings and generals. But this is the role that changed me." He leaned forward slightly. "So I ask you, what story are you telling? What legacy are you honoring? And what act of love will echo after you're gone?" The screen faded to black. Then, in simple white text, "I believe in the power of love and leadership." Underneath it, "Do you?" The video went viral again. But this time, it wasn't just viral, it was viral with purpose. In Burkina Faso, candlelight vigils were held in every province. In New York, 1,000 schoolchildren wrote essays about the women who raised them. In Brazil, a documentary crew began filming the lives of unsung mothers in the favelas. And in Ghana, an orphanage was renamed in Maman Hawa's honor. The ripple kept spreading. Because the world didn't just watch this story. They became part of it. And in doing so, they ensured that the love of one quiet woman, from one quiet village, would never be forgotten. Her story wasn't just remembered. It was reborn. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and share this story with someone who needs hope today. Let's make sure the world hears what love sounds like.